Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're doing something a little different and honestly deeply fascinating. We're actually stepping away from the standard data charts and spreadsheets for a minute to dive into a really profound poetic meditation on a massive global crisis. We're looking at a piece titled Poverty Needs Insight, and we're going to unpack exactly what that means. So let's just jump right in, because what we're about to explore is this totally unique framework for understanding one of the world's absolute most complex socioeconomic challenges, but we're doing it entirely through the lens of a beautifully structured piece of writing.
Poverty is strange as the rag. It nauseates riches. Just let those opening lines sit with you for a second. We immediately feel this intense, almost aggressive friction between absolute destitution, the rag, and the visceral reaction of wealth, nauseated riches. It's a super powerful, honestly kind of uncomfortable opening that basically forces us to stop scrolling and start really thinking. But before we break down the rest of these impactful lines, we really need to understand the mind behind them.
And that leads us perfectly to our next big question. How exactly does a policy influencer view the living, breathing nature of poverty? See, the lines we just read, they weren't written by someone just observing from some ivory tower. They were written by someone whose actual daily reality involves tackling these issues head-on. To truly grasp the weight of this text, we've got to look at how her real-world expertise shapes every single word she writes.
Meet Oluyemi Ola David. She is a Nigerian who is just deeply concerned with global development and transformation. She's a policy influencer and she's a global advocate. And this context, it's absolutely critical for our explainer today. Because when she writes about poverty, she isn't just creating art for art's sake, right? She is leveraging her deep understanding of societal structures to provide absolute clarity on a massive global issue. Her perspective is entirely rooted in a genuine, on-the-ground reality.
So let's break down her core mission. Oluyemi Ola David is out there actively working to generate real solutions and influence policy and strategy. Her work is driven by this profound love for people, and it's guided by her faith in Father God, who she notes owns and rules the universe. So the really crucial point to take away from this is that her insights into poverty are ultimately meant to drive concrete global transformation. She is mapping out the emotional and systemic landscape of poverty so that we can, better navigate and actually solve it.
Moving into Section 1, we're looking at the framework, personifying poverty.
To translate her concrete policy goals into this text, she relies heavily on a really specific literary framework, personification, basically attributing human characteristics, behaviors, or emotions to something non-human. She doesn't just hand us a boring list of economic indicators. By using this tool, she treats poverty not as some static, abstract statistic buried in a government report, but as an active, living, breathing entity. It's literally a character in our global story. And honestly, it's a brilliant way to help us grasp the active, aggressive role poverty plays in millions of lives.
And this right here brilliantly illustrates that personification in action. Poverty wakes the slumber, it holds watch, it cares less. Just look at those active verbs. It wakes, it holds, it cares. She's describing poverty as a relentless, watchful force. It doesn't sleep. It's this active disruptor of daily life that actively hunts and impacts people, entirely devoid of empathy. It really shifts your perspective, doesn't it?
That brings us to Theme 1, the paradox of wealth and luxury.
Let's unpack the brilliant juxtaposition she uses here. While it nauseates riches, repelling the wealthy, poverty simultaneously provides the incredibly cheap labor that literally outfits luxury. This is such a critical insight from her. She observes this almost parasitic relationship where poverty is pushed away socially, yet totally relied upon economically.
And she continues that powerful comparison here. It frees the ant versus it hosts slaves. Think about what she's conveying with that. The ant represents the absolute base level of survival. Poverty strips you down to nothing but the instinct to gather and survive, which is a strange, primal kind of freedom. Yet simultaneously, it hosts slaves. It creates systemic subjugation. People are trapped in a cycle they just cannot escape, completely enslaved by their economic conditions. Which culminates in this seemingly contradictory line, it loves luxury. This is a really profound insight. Like, how can poverty love luxury? Well, because as she maps out, poverty is inextricably, almost ironically, linked to the very luxury it cannot afford to consume, but is forced to produce. The existence of extreme luxury in the world is often directly tied to the existence of extreme poverty. They're basically two sides of the exact same economic coin.
Okay, on to Theme 2, social isolation and survival.
Here she shifts her focus to the intensely personal, isolating reality of being poor.
It empties out audience. What exactly does she mean by this? Well, she's describing the devastating social abandonment that comes with being in need. When you have nothing to offer, when you're struggling, the crowd just disappears. The audience of society, of those fair-weather acquaintances, simply empties out. It's a profoundly lonely experience that she captures just perfectly in those 4 words.
But, there is a flip side to that isolation. It verifies friendship. So the crucial point she makes here is that poverty acts as a brutal, unforgiving social filter. When the audience empties out, whoever is left standing beside you is verified. Poverty strips away all the illusions and social pleasantries, revealing to her exactly who true friends really are. It's a really harsh way to learn, for sure, but it leaves zero room for fake relationships.
And through all of this survival, poverty keeps scores. I absolutely love this line because it emphasizes her view of poverty as a relentless record keeper. When you're living on the edge, every single penny, every slight, every favor owed, and every survival tactic is tallied. You literally can't afford to forget anything. Poverty forces this mental ledger on people that is just completely exhausting.
Next up, Theme 3, Illusions and Brutal Realities. Let's look at the tension between temporary escapes and the harsh truths people ultimately face. Consider the escapes she lists here. It lives in fantasy. It welcomes wine. Poverty likes the junk. She isn't judging here, right? She's observing the coping mechanisms. When the reality of poverty is just way too heavy to bear, people naturally look for temporary escapes, whether that's daydreams, substances like wine, or cheap, accessible distractions, the junk. These are the illusions poverty creates to make itself temporarily survivable.
But unfortunately, those escapes are only temporary. The stark contrast is right here. It embraces hunger. No matter how much fantasy or wine is welcomed, she presents the unavoidable, stark reality, the inescapable physical toll of hunger. The personified poverty literally embraces starvation. It's a brutal reminder that while the mind might try to escape, the physical body remains entirely trapped in the condition.
And on a broader societal level, she observes a dual reality. On one hand, poverty entertains oppression, systemically breeding environments where it can just comfortably thrive. On the other hand, it ignores strife, as the genuine human struggle of those suffering is completely ignored by the wider world. It's this vicious cycle of structural violence and societal apathy.
Finally, our conclusion, from insight to solution.
To wrap up this explainer, we really have to tie these themes back to her concrete role in global development, which brings us right back to the title, Poverty Needs Insight. This isn't just some catchy headline, it's her core thesis. She's arguing that this very piece, this emotional, personified, deeply observational framework, is the exact insight that is absolutely necessary before we can create real, effective policy solutions. I mean, you simply cannot fix what you do not truly understand on a human level.
And that leaves us with one final super crucial question to consider today. If poverty truly needs insight, if we need to understand it as a living, watchful, score-keeping entity that both repels and builds luxury, how will her words change our policies? How can we actually take this artistic, personified framework and use it to drive tangible, systemic change in global development? It's a massive question, but honestly, thanks to Oluyomi Oladevid's insights, it's a conversation we are now much better equipped to have. Thank you so much for exploring this fascinating text with me today.